in Genesis when God says, "Let us make man in our image"? Why is that plural? And is that evidence or acknowledgement of the Trinity in Genesis? So, to answer that question, I think it's helpful to have context of what the book of Genesis is doing. The book of Genesis was written to introduce God to the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel had been surrounded by the Egyptians and ancient Near Eastern nations and all of their religious beliefs with their plurality of gods. And so this new concept of one God is a brand new concept. So God's title of God is always referred to in the Old Testament in the plural, Elohim. That's a plural word, instead of Eloha, which would be the singular version of that. And this is to communicate like the vastness and the greatness of God, that a singular person couldn't contain how vast and how great God is. But the interesting thing is that it's usually paired with a singular verb. It'll be a plural Elohim, and then it'll be a singular verb saying that it's only one person that's doing that action or saying those words. And so it's clear from that, all throughout the Old Testament, that it's one true God. And we're just using the plural word for God to show that he's greater than any other being. So that's like a clear thing throughout the Old Testament referring to God. The interesting thing is that when the story is being told in Genesis and God starts talking about himself, instead of when the passage is talking about him, it's the normal form of plural God, singular verb. But when God's talking about himself, the verbs and the prepositions are plural in verse 26 of Genesis. So verse 26 is building off of God's title being plural to communicate his greatness. And when he's talking to himself, he's still that greatness. This verse, or the general use of Elohim, isn't specifically arguing for the doctrine of the Trinity, because, again, it's in that greater context of singular verbs. So when God's talking about himself, it's in the context of the name God, which is plural. But in all of the surrounding passages, it still has those singular verbs. So it's not specifically arguing for the doctrine of the Trinity. In other words, you can't learn about the doctrine of the Trinity from Genesis chapter 1. But once it's revealed to us in the New Testament, it fits really nicely with that use of Elohim. And so it fits nicely with our theology of the doctrine of the Trinity, and it's definitely not contradictory to it. But it's not something that you could innately learn from reading Genesis 1 on its own. If you just picked up Genesis 1 in the Hebrew, the Trinity is not something you would gather from that.